let's get into that first topic. First topic we're going to be talking about is Joe Rogan fights Mark Cuban. That's right. Joe Rogan fights Mark Cuban. Now, there was this, I watched this on Timcast, release about this thing that's happening. I don't know whether you've seen it, but what's happening is Joe Rogan did an interview with RFK, and RFK was talking about his vaccines and not all this so-called misinformation around vaccines, and there's been this little bit of a spat on Twitter now, and Joe Rogan has then now publicly said, "Hey, I'll put up $100,000 for someone to debate, or actually for Dr. Peter Hotez, who to debate about vaccines." And they go back and forwards, and there's a spat on Twitter. Mark Cuban, a whole bunch of other people jump in and offer a bunch of money. Andrew Tate offers money. Patrick Bet-David, who we're going to be talking about a little bit later as well, throws up some money. And I think the pool that they're offering for this debate to go to charity is now in the like $4 to $5 million now that the people have put up. So there's a lot of money that's going around to be debated about these vaccines. Now, obviously, the vaccines is a touchy topic, right? It's a contentious topic, and there's a lot of misinformation out there. Obviously, during COVID, there was everyone was being wiped off YouTube and other social medias if they ever mentioned vaccines in a negative way or anything like that, and. Joe Rogan is somewhat of an anti-vaxxer, and same with RFK. Dr. Peter Hotez obviously is a big advocate for vaccines, and they're claiming that RFK is just touting a lot of misinformation. All the stuff that he's saying is incorrect. And Joe's just saying, well, you know what? If you think what he's saying is incorrect, come and debate him, right? And I think that there's arguments that they're bullying and stuff like that, but I feel like, and why I actually wanted to start out with this is we when we're talking about use or abuse of power, we tend to just focus on people abusing their power rather than using it for good. And so I wanted to start off on a good topic like this, where it's good evidence of someone like Joe Rogan using the power that he has for good. Now, I know he might push a little bit of misinformation. He might be an anti-vax or whatever side of the aisle you stand on with vaccines. We're not here to debate that. But I kind of like the fact, Dr. Rod, that Joe Rogan is using his power to be able to generate a conversation, to be able to use his power, which is platform, which is reach. He's probably the largest podcast on the planet. He's probably got the most influence when it comes to media, and he's not only giving up his platform, he's also giving up some of his money, and to be able to encourage a conversation, a healthy conversation, which I think is great. And this kind of the reason why I wanted to highlight is this: I believe this is a good use of power. That sometimes we talk down on people wanting to be famous, wanting to be wealthy, and things like that. And it's spoken down to, especially in the church circles, that money and fame and everything is bad. But this is an example of why it's important for us to have a platform, while it's important for us to have some sort of influential power and some finances behind us. Because, hey, rather than there be this backyard spat or whatever, we can now have Joe Rogan's offering his power, his platform, and his money for a healthy debate. What's your take on this situation?
Well, by and large, I would agree with you, Craig. I think both Professor Peter Hotez and RFK, they've gone public with their views. They are now very well known. and it makes some sense to bring them into a debate. I notice that some commentators are saying, well, that's the only way we'll get at the truth. I wouldn't have that much confidence in the outcome of a debate. But both of these people are now public figures, and they clearly take different sides of the debate on vaccines. And so I think there is a lot of sense in people like Joe Rogan, who have got a very large followership, to host a debate. And Joe Rogan, he's a good guy. You know, I think he's his approach, I think, to journalism is the kind of approach that should be being taken by the mainstream media, which of course it doesn't. And the mainstream media tends to push its own barrow, so to speak. So look, I think what Joe Rogan has offered to do is a very good thing. And, you know, I certainly hope that as antagonist, RFK, and as protagonist, Peter Hotez actually get to do a debate, if not on Joe Rogan's podcast and on some other social media or other media that has a large audience.
So let's pull this back to us as leaders, right? Not all of us have a platform like Joe. Not all of us have the money to be able to just throw out $100,000 for someone to have a conversation. What do you think the lesson is here for us as everyday leaders, let's call us?
Oh, look, I think this points to us needing to use whatever power, influence, whatever money we have for the common good. And look, I think a debate about vaccines is something which ought to happen for the common good. I've got a particular view. It doesn't really matter what that is, but I think once people with a high profile go public, then I think they do have a responsibility to respond to as many invitations as they possibly can. Now, I know I've said on this podcast before, you have the right to remain silent, so to speak, and that you don't have to respond to the media. But it's a little bit different in a sense when you've made the first approach.
Yes, and
so
when you're meant to be the authority on that topic.
Well, RFK is not necessarily an authority, but he's put himself forward as a candidate for the presidency of the United States. So that's the most high-profile job on the planet. And because he's publicly stated his views, particularly about the relationship between vaccines and autism, and obviously he's got a lot of views on the COVID vaccines, he's made that public already. So that's now part of his profile as a potential candidate for the presidency of the United States. So he's got a very public profile and obviously some influence, because I believe about 20% of voters would back him for president of the United States, or at least for selection as a candidate. So he's got a high profile. He's got quite a following. And Professor Peter Hotez, of course, has made a lot of public statements over the last few years. He's a very strong proponent of vaccines. So both have a high public profile. I think once you've come out in the public, when you are invited to a debate by someone as sensible as Joe Rogan, then I really think you should take it up. So good on Joe Rogan and the others who have backed it in, and great for the charity that wins out in the end.
And so I suppose one thing like that I take away from this as a leader is we don't be afraid to use the platform that we've got, right? Because I think nowadays we're trying to, I think we tend to be afraid, or maybe there is, how do I say this? There is fear of being attacked if we actually step up and do anything outside of what is the norm expected. And so I'd encourage people, like, use your platform. And you don't need as big of a platform as Joe Rogan has, but you can use your platform, right? Whatever you've got, there is something, like the story of Moses at the burning bush. It's like, well, use what's in your hand. whatever is in your hand, you do have something to use. But talking about this debate, and one thing that I found very interesting was, and why we're actually talking about Joe Rogan fighting Mark Cuban, is Patrick Bet-David on PBD podcast. They were talking about this this Twitter feud between Joe Rogan and Mark Cuban, and even Patrick Bet-David got in into the fold as well. And at the end of the day, I don't know where this quote, I think this was, I forget where this quote was from, but the one of them said, and I can't remember who it was, I just wrote it down here because I like the quote, the best way to combat misinformation is to provide good information. I think that was a really powerful quote, and we are up against a lot of stuff that is, we're up against a lot of stuff that is on, we're battling truth right now. Right, we are battling truth, and the biggest challenge with truth is that. Sorry, Yash, you can take that screen down. Thanks, Yash. Sorry, there we go. In battling truth, we're talking about this. We spoke about this a few weeks ago about gender identity politics and what we call people and all this sort of stuff. And there's a lot of, let's say, non-truth going on around out there. And the best way to combat that is with good information. Don't shy away from it. Don't cower away, but present it with good information, right? The best way to combat misinformation is to provide good information. How do we make sure that we're providing good information? Because obviously we don't want to start an argument. We don't want to be putting people down. We don't want to, but we still need to stand up for what we believe in and present our side of the argument. How do we do that?
Oh, you're asking me that question?
Yeah.
Well, I was thinking as you were speaking, you need to be well researched. You got to invest a fair amount of time in researching before you actually come out and say anything publicly. So you've got to be fairly well convinced yourself of whatever point it is that you're making. So you do have a responsibility to undertake some research yourself, and sometimes that means going a little bit further than 15 minutes on Google. Mm-hmm. Maybe you need to go and talk to some experts. Maybe you need to reflect on your own personal experience and the experience of others. And then sometimes also I think you need to publicly recognise that you don't know the actual truth or the actual facts, but you've come to a particular position based on what information you've been able to obtain.
Yeah.
So the vaccine one is, that's a particularly difficult one, because we know that throughout history, vaccines have had an immensely positive impact on human health and average life expectancies and so on. But yet with COVID, I think many of us have lost confidence in Big Pharma. We've lost confidence in government as well because of the way in which the whole COVID vaccine issue was handled. And so many of us, I think, are in this position where we don't want to be irresponsible, but at the same time, we have to come out, and honestly say, I don't have the same confidence I used to have in Big Pharma or in government, and here's why.
Look, I like there is obviously there's this spat where Dr. Peter Hotez is avoiding the debate. RFK wants to debate on it. Joe Rogan wants to debate. Everyone's saying, well, we should have a public debate. We should have a public debate. Like you said earlier, public debate isn't necessarily the best way to get the answers. It's just the best, presenting the best person to debate. And there was comments about that maybe Dr. Peter Hotez is not the right person to be debating because it's maybe not his skill set, because debate is a skill set of its own. And I kind of agree with that, yeah, I'm not sure if a debate is necessarily the right way to go about it, but there does need to be a discussion. There needs to be dialogue back and forth. Now, with a situation like this, I would love to see an open dialogue back and forwards. Now, whether it be on Twitter or on a platform or like, I don't know, but I think that each person should present their point, and then the other person should have an opportunity to go away and research it and then respond to that thing, and then the other person should then, like a debate, but rather than trying to think on your feet of what you may know offhand, but actually go away and research each item and then come back and discuss it. And I kind of wonder whether there's maybe a long form debate that could be had with this, right? Whether there's someone presents their part on a video or whatever, and then the other party gets a chance to go away, research that and debate that, respond. And then the other person gets to go away and respond. And because the whole point of this is not about proving who's right or wrong. And a lot of people are arguing that RFK's not the best person to debate because he just disregards facts and stuff like that. Now, what side of the aisle you are that you say that, there's obviously going to be some biases. But the whole point of this is, don't we as, the country, don't we as the people that are being affected by the vaccine and the decisions government make, don't we have the right to be able to learn what the real facts are and to be able to see what those facts are unfold? Like, why is it, and this is probably now, on our topic of like Joe Rogan's using his power for good, that's great, but isn't it abuse of power that they're not allowing, the government aren't allowing us, the people that are being affected by this vaccine, to actually know the real facts about it?
Look, in this case here in Australia, I believe we should have a royal commission into the whole thing, and I'm not the only one. Whether or not we're going to see that, I just don't know. I think maybe in time we will, because I think there's a lot of facts that have never become public that really ought to over the whole affair, particularly the flow-on effects, but mental health effects in particular, people being locked up. We know, for example, that there was an increase in domestic abuse during lockdown periods and so on and so forth. Look, there's so much that really needs to come out into the open. I'm particularly concerned about whether or not we allocated enough resources to the elderly and to those who are vulnerable, rather than taking this one kind of size fits all, and we go around vaccinating 5-year-old children and telling kids in school to wear masks and so on, while elderly folk were dying, and people at risk weren't necessarily getting the treatment that they ought to have. We knew, for example, that people who were overweight had a higher risk of suffering complications, etc., but governments didn't do too much about that either. It's a really fraught area, and it's not the only one. There are, climate change is another one, and the whole issue of human sexual identity. These are other areas. I think it's healthy to have debates, and some people do it well. There are a handful of people who host debates very, very well. Joe Rogan is one of them. Megyn Kelly's another who does an outstanding job, in my opinion. And there are others. Ben Shapiro's another, who I think would be really, really good in this kind of role. The difficulty, of course, is both sides of the argument believe they have the true facts, and obviously they'll present them as the true facts. I think for us to be responsible, we've really got to make up our own mind, take responsibility for doing so.
How do we, though, find those facts? Because obviously there was a lot of censorship on, now only just recently YouTube have removed their ban on vaccine misinformation, and so and then obviously still some things that like because the RFK and Jordan Peterson video got removed from YouTube, and so how do we actually find the real information? Like so you mentioned a royal commission. Is that our last hope now to actually find real information? And is that uncorruptible? Is that pure? Explain the Royal Commission to us.
Well, a Royal Commission operates at the behest of government, and it has, they're given all of the parameters within which they're supposed to operate. So if we have a Royal Commission, you appoint a commissioner who's normally someone with a background in law. I don't think it has to be, and sometimes it shouldn't be, but usually it's a retired judge or somebody with that kind of experience, and they have a whole team to assist them. And the idea is that you'll get at least the facts, if not the truth. Mm-hmm. And I think that that's our best hope, at least here in Australia, of uncovering what really went on. Why it was. For example, sorry, you go.
Are they incorruptible?
Look, there's no human system that's not incorruptible because human beings are fallible, human beings are fallen as well. So there's no guarantee whatsoever. But in Australia, that's probably the best that we could ever offer up by way of dredging up some of the facts that haven't really come to the fore. But look, gradually information is becoming available, of course, so we can now be pretty certain that the virus was an escapee from a research laboratory in Wuhan. Yep. We can now freely say that on social media because it's widely recognised that that's the case. When we've got people like Miranda Devine, she's an Australian. I'm very proud of her. She works for the Washington Post. She's done some sterling work here in Australia. Sherry Markson is another, done some great work in uncovering the facts for us. And look, I think ultimately there will be momentum build for something like that. But leaders have the courage to deal with the facts and to deal with the truth. And I think that one of the things we saw during the whole COVID period, and we're continuing to see, is that a lot of leaders don't have the courage to deal with it. So they go with the flow, and I think that's what happened. It happened worldwide. This is not just something confined to Australia. Here in Australia, we had an agreed plan to deal with pandemics that was revised in 2019, and we threw it out the window. We started closing our borders. We closed our national borders. We closed state borders. We had lockdowns. We had forced vaccinations, all kinds of things. People lost their jobs because they didn't want to have a vaccination, despite the fact that it's official policy in Australia that vaccination is something which is voluntary. You still can't travel outside Australia if you don't show a vaccination certificate. Yeah. Even now, and I know that because I travelled overseas not all that long ago. And just less than a month ago, actually. So, look, we really need to have a decent investigation into this kind of stuff. And I think the only way of getting at it, at least in the Australian context, is a royal commission.
So as leaders, let's make sure that we use our platform for good. Like make sure we use the power, use what's in our hand, use the facts. Make sure, let's be open to healthy debate. Let's not shy away because through the only way to combat misinformation is good information. And so make sure that you're not cowering away from the information that you have, whether it be your industry, whether it be your faith, whatever it is that you feel like God has called you to fight against. Well, you know what? Use your platform. Use whatever's in your hand to try to spread as much good information, and don't be afraid of a healthy debate. I know that it is hard, but what's the best way to do a healthy debate is be researched, be prepared. The Bible says be ready in season and out of season. Don't wait till someone challenges you to a debate and then go away and do your research. Do your research now as if you are going to be in a debate tomorrow, so that if you happen to come across someone that disagrees with your position, you can actually have a healthy conversation where you're both open to learning, And look, I hope that there is some way that we can finally see what the truth is. People are held accountable for misinformation, and it's funny how the left is challenging the right for all their misinformation, but really it was, there was a lot of misinformation out there from both sides, and I think we need to be held accountable for that. Obviously, we need to know what our influence and our power is, and use it wisely. Know who we're influencing and why we're influencing them. And like Joe Rogan, rather than trying to force someone one way, just use your power, your platform, your influence to be able to open the dialogue for a healthy debate. Hey, you've just watched an excerpt from the On the Cube Leadership podcast. If you liked it, give it a thumbs up. If it challenged your leadership or inspired you in some way, put a comment below. And if you want to watch the full episode or more content like this, check out our channel. And hey, consider subscribing while you're there.